One of the most frightening nights of my life happened when I was just a teenager. I was spending the day over at a friend's house on the weekend. We got pretty caught up in what we were doing, as we pretty much always did. I was there for basically the whole day and a really long portion of the night as well. It was pretty late out when I finally decided it would be a good time to head home. My friend had parents that stayed up pretty late at night, but this time they had already gone to bed. He offered to wake his dad up to give me a ride home, but I didn't want him to do that. It was dark and late, and it was going to be a long walk. I had no problems doing it myself, though. He lived on one side of town in a really built-up subdivision. I was in an older neighborhood, in which all of the houses did not look alike. Although it was a small town, it was quite a far walk for me to make. Walking outside, I noticed that it was very windy out. This was in the early fall. School had just recently started. I remember that much. Looking up at the sky, I noticed that it was not overcast quite yet, but the clouds were moving in very fast. They would cover up the moon and then just as quickly move off of it. I wasn't the type of guy who got scared by walking anywhere in the dark. I did that sort of thing all the time, really. I had, in fact, walked from my buddy's house to my house many times late at night. But for some reason, on this particular night, I began to feel very uncomfortable. It was like an old cartoon, where the character breaks the fourth wall and asks if you've ever gotten the feeling like you were being watched. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought at the time, a Bugs Bunny type cartoon. I was really getting this intense feeling of being watched. This was a completely new sensation for me, and it just sort of built upon itself, if that makes sense. Fear or any apprehension just seems to make every other fear and apprehension worse, little by little. It didn't happen right away. The subdivision that my buddy's family lived in was the newest thing in that area. There weren't a lot of trees and there was a ton of open space and plenty of lighting, but immediately after exiting the subdivision and getting onto the road, all of that changed. There was much less light, more plants, and plenty of other things to obstruct your vision. I've since lived in some bigger metropolitan areas where I've been outside late at night and had other people walking around. This town was nothing like that, however. It was in fact just the opposite. The very fact that I was a teenager and out that late at night would often have a cop stop me and ask me if everything was wrong. I doubt they ever thought anybody was in danger really, but they were just bored and wanted something to do. I had never felt quite so uneased as I did this night, and I couldn't really explain why at all. I started wondering if there was something out there that maybe my subconscious mind was picking up on, that I wasn't consciously aware of. That made me a lot more nervous too. To get to my house, I could either go down the mid-street in town, or go through the park. Although the town street would be less intimidating, I decided to walk through the park. Yeah, it was pretty much a bravado thing completely. I told myself it was a good idea to just face my fears. Well, this park in town was actually rather huge. It was surrounded by an asphalt trail, much like you would see in a cemetery or some such. There were trees lined up all along the outside of that trail. There was a field for playing different sports as well. But late at night, none of the major lights for that were on. There were some lampposts in the park, but there were not very many of them. Then, on the really far end, there was this playground for the children. It was eerie walking through there, and I immediately wished to myself that I had just gone through town instead. I decided to just try and get through it. I really wish I could explain it better than I've been doing. I just don't have the ability to be that descriptive. As I walked down the path, I kept looking over at that playground. There was something there that looked like it was moving. There were more lights over there than by me. I suppose that was probably a safety concern for children or something. But I could tell there was something moving just a little. I kept trying to look at it as I moved along, while also walking up against the trees too in order to not be seen. As I got closer, I was finally able to see what it was that was moving. I was surprised to see that it was the merry-go-round. I kept watching, and it came a bit more into focus as I got closer and closer. I could see there were apparently two people by the merry-go-round. It looked like one person was lying down, and the other person was slowly spinning the merry-go-round with them on it. It was a weird thing to see at like 2 o'clock in the morning, but I didn't think too much about it. All I really figured was that there was a couple of teenagers, probably older than me, maybe a boyfriend and girlfriend, being out late together. I tried to keep quiet and not let them know I had stumbled upon their extracurricular activities. But to tell you the truth, with how nervous I had been since leaving my friend's house, it made me feel a lot better to see some other people around. It in fact washed away most of the apprehension that I was feeling, and I was able to make it the rest of the way home without worrying too much. It wasn't until the following morning that fear came back to me. You see, because we lived in a really small town, there was hardly ever any crime there. But my best friend had called me up on the phone and asked me if I had heard the news. What he said, well, it made me more scared than anything I had seen the previous night. A dead teenager was found in the park. She was found strangled to death by a few kids, arriving to play on the merry-go-round, upon which she was laying. Well, I had to get in touch with the police, and I had an interview with them. Although no one could say for sure, the thought was that the person I watched spinning the merry-go-round had killed the teenager. I gave them a description as well as I could. It was very scary, being the only witness to something like that, and it made my future walks at night always all the more terrifying. I had a pretty difficult time when I first went off to college. I didn't go to the same college as any of my friends, and I had 1 year of community college at first. Being a sophomore meant that I was able to have a room of my own, so I immediately went for it. I guess in hindsight that may have been a mistake because it further isolated me from people, but since I really didn't know anyone at the school, I felt a bit more comfortable that way. I didn't become that social either. I kept my dorm room closed most of the time. I was nervous about joining any clubs because I really didn't know where I would fit in. I felt like I was very out of place amongst the others there and did nothing to try and make that easier on myself. I liked sleeping in, so I took most of my classes in the afternoon or evening. One of my classes was once a week on Tuesday and didn't end until about 10 p.m. It was on the far side of campus from my dorm, so I was used to walking home late at night on Tuesdays all the way across the campus. This was never something that was scary or anything, because there were normally lots of other students around. This event, however, took place on a very strange night. It was very, very cold outside, and although classes were not canceled, it seemed a majority of students in the school had decided to just not go. It started snowing during class as well, and that class itself was 3 hours long. There were like 4 of us in the class, if I can remember that correctly. The professor had even asked all of us if we wanted to stop class early since no one was there, and by that point it was snowing really hard outside. All of us declined, however. We really enjoyed that class and we all liked the teacher as well. By the time we were done, it was around 10 p.m. The professor dismissed the class and we all went our separate ways. I didn't have a real idea how hard the snow was falling or just how cold it actually got until I was outside the door. The wind nearly blew the door closed on me. It was surprising. It was freezing, and the snow was blowing right into my eyes. I needed to deal with it though in order to get back to my dorm room. On the walk back, I tried to cut behind a couple of buildings that I sometimes walked through. There were some trees planted there, and it was generally a really quiet area that I liked walking through. I thought maybe it would allow me a little respite from the cutting winds. As I walked behind the building though, I noticed a bit of a shape up ahead of me. I could see there was someone else there. I didn't give it a second thought at first because, of course, I was on a campus with 20,000 other students. However, it was really weird that whoever it was not moving at all. They were just standing in place. So yeah, as I walked further and further up toward them, I did begin to get slightly freaked out. I felt like they were waiting for me or something. Still, as I got closer, the person did not move at all. I was having a hard time seeing them very well because of the wind and snow that were hitting my face, but the whole thing was just so eerie at this point. I walked to the side. I didn't want to come in contact with this person in any way. I could tell it wasn't someone I knew, since I really didn't know anyone. As I was walking out of that area though, something grabbed me by the left wrist. I nearly slipped and fell over, but managed to turn around. The figure had come over to me and grabbed my arm. It was only then that I really got a good look at the person, and I really wish I hadn't. It was this deranged-looking man who was way too old to be a student. I wondered if he might be a homeless person who had wandered onto campus. I struggled to pull my wrist away, but he wouldn't let go. I watched him move his other hand and pull a knife out. Panicking, I began to kick him in the knees. He had first lost balance and let go of me, then he slipped as well. I also slipped, but I was able to get some traction and I started running. I went to the door to the building that we were behind and got inside. I pulled the lock for the door before I went to look for campus security. The campus police picked the guy up later on. It turns out he had been waiting for someone who was in the class I had been in. That person ended up skipping the class because of the storm. However, they assumed I was that person, and that's why they tried to attack me. The student later confided in me that the guy had been stalking him since the beginning of the semester. He was worried that the guy had grown unstable and might have killed him if he got his hands on him. Problem was, the only thing he managed to get his hands on was me. I used to work at a fast food restaurant in my early 20s. After a few years, I was promoted to a management position and moved to a smaller store in a town called Park City, Illinois. One really interesting thing was that there was a guy who would come into the store I previously worked in. He was a really large guy who reminded me a bit of the lead singer of the group Blues Traveler. He dressed a little bit similarly too. He always came into the store holding this cane that he didn't have to use for walking. Another thing I remember is he always ordered a triple cheeseburger meal, large-sized. I was always friendly with the guy in the previous store, but that was about as far as it went. I never talked to him very much, or really any more than I normally would have for any other regular customer. However, when he began coming into the store in Park City, which was much smaller and much less busy, the guy and I began to start talking more, and we actually began to consider each other as friends. It turned out his name was Paul, and he would come into the restaurant between 2 and 5 p.m. a couple of times every week. We were normally very dead at that time period, so I could just talk to a customer for a while if I felt like it. He was unemployed but had a computer programming job for like 17 years. Unfortunately, the company had just laid off a bunch of people. I think he said that his wife was a nurse or something. I know he watched a lot of movies, and he would always show me his collected ticket stubs when he came in. He watched The Matrix a bunch and would always tell me about how good a movie it was. At the time, I had no interest in seeing it though. I figured it was yet another virtual reality movie, and I hadn't seen any movies with that concept actually be good. There was one day that was a bit interesting to me. He had come into the restaurant with a man he called Reverend Bob. They had taped an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, another thing I didn't watch at the time, and were talking about that and some other things. Paul introduced me to Bob as someone who had studied American Indian shamanism. We all began talking about ghosts and those sorts of things. Bob mentioned to me that although Paul never believed him, he had seen a ghost in Paul's house one time. I don't always, or really never, believe someone when they talk about a ghost sighting. I take each explanation at face value on its own perceived merit, but I was mostly interested in this because it was a friend of mine, and his buddy, and they both didn't agree on if there was really a ghost or not. Anyhow, at that time, Paul told me that he would take me over to his house sometime in case I wanted to see if there really was a ghost there. I was pretty interested in that. At the time, I lived a bit away from the store. I had a place much closer to the one I had previously worked out of, and Paul lived pretty close to the one I was a manager at now. When I first got over to Paul's house, it was actually the perfect weather to be looking at a haunted house. If nothing else, it was a really good atmosphere setter at least. Now, at the time, I guess I considered myself very spiritual and open-minded about that sort of thing. I had never seen a ghost or anything like that. I had done some things like involved myself in a spirit quest, and I had been to a sweat lodge once and seen some things too, but I had never really seen or knew if I believed in ghosts or not. I just didn't exactly disbelieve in them, if that makes sense. I only mentioned that because I had no idea what to expect if I would actually see a ghost. When we went into Paul's house, I experienced something, a feeling unlike any I had ever experienced before. I'm going to do my best to try and describe it, but I'm not sure how well I'll be able to do this. It was like no matter where I stood, anywhere in that house, it felt like someone was peeking around the corner looking at me. Paul noticed immediately how distracted I became and asked me if I could feel anything. I wasn't able to even explain it to him as well as I explained it here. It was the creepiest feeling I had ever experienced in my entire life, and no matter what, I could not shake it. Paul showed me throughout the house, and that feeling lingered the entire time. He showed me the bedrooms, the study. Then we went down into the basement. He had this game in the basement he wanted to show me. He also had a huge collection of Pokemon cards, and he showed me those too. We played a couple of games, and I had a fun time hanging out with him, despite the fact I could not shake this odd feeling. With the presence of my friend, though, I was able to relax and have a pretty good day, actually. When we were going up to the main floor, wanting to get something to eat, I let him go up the stairs first. The stairs were just wooden boards set off in a corner of the basement. As I was beginning to walk up the stairs, I was startled to see two green lights as if they were eyes appear in the darkness underneath the stairs. I jumped back off of them and then saw something move in the dark. Paul noticed what happened. Before I could ask him anything, he asked me this: "Did you see the green eyes under the stairs?" He then flipped on the light switch, which showed me there was absolutely nothing there, much less anything that could have made lights. He explained to me that he had never seen those green eyes before, but the Reverend Bob, the guy he had mentioned earlier, had seen them once and told him about them. He hadn't mentioned it to me previously because if I were to see them, he didn't want it to be because of the power of suggestion from him, but him telling me what I saw before I mentioned it definitely proved to me I had seen something, and I had no explanation for it. Paul and I hung out occasionally in that house for a while after that, but I never had an experience like that ever again. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you like the content of this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any thoughts about the stories in this video, or any thoughts about how I can improve the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below. I always look through all of the comments, and I really love reading your guys' feedback. For the stories in this video, I would like to give a special thanks to Killer Orange Cat and all of his subscribers for allowing me to use their stories on my channel. I will leave a link to his channel in the description below the video. Please be sure to check him out. He also does true scary story readings, and he is very good at them. If you guys would like to contact me for any reason, or you would like to send in your own story to be read on the channel, please take a look in the description below the video. You will find links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send me a story to read, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, guys, I also have two other channels I run, one called Darkest Hour, where I do monthly documentary videos, and one called Mr. Blue Skies, where I do true crime videos at least once a week. If you guys like that kind of content and you like my voice, why not go ahead and check those out? Maybe you'll enjoy the content. Overall though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.